Just press the Let's Go Live button, so let's wait for the stream to fire up all across the fruited plains of the internet. Before we go ahead and get started, it's Friday, and we've got a lot to get to. We've got 2 full days of Ghislaine Maxwell to squeeze into one, and so we've got to make sure that the streams are rocking and rolling before we do that. So let's check over here on YouTube. Looks like that's working. We've got Facebook is up, Odyssey, Rumble, and Twitter. Twitch usually takes a minute, but they're there. So that means we can get going. Let's do it. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here at the R&R Law Group, and today we're talking about Ghislaine Maxwell. She's in trial day 9 and 10. We're squeezing 2 days into one because day 9 was really not much at all. It was just kind of a sick day. We got in there yesterday. We had a little bit of testimony from a FedEx employee, and that was it. We were out because a prosecutor, I think, was sick. We don't know that for sure, but we're going to talk about what happened yesterday, and then we're going to transition right into today's testimony because today was a whopper. We had Annie Farmer. This was the only named victim, the only victim in the Epstein Maxwell trial that actually identified herself and came out in court and testified today under her actual identity. And it was very powerful. I have a lot of the transcript from the usual people. We've got Inner City Press. We've got Adam Klasfeld over at Law and Crime. And we've got a lot of different stories that we're going to be poking around and sort of covering today, asking ourselves some very important questions. Today, the government finished their case 2 weeks in, and they told us that this thing was going to be going all the way up into January, that we were preparing for a 6-week trial. So that's kind of a big question that we have. Did the prosecution fumble the case? We've got an article here from somebody over at Vanity Fair who says they did. And I've got some compare and contrast data to take a look at the length of time that the government took in this case, about 8 days, which if you do the math, we'll get into it, versus some of the other trials that we've seen, like Derek Chauvin's trial, or like Bill Cosby's trial, another case involving similar allegations. So we've got to take a look at that question. We're also asking ourselves, is Ghislaine Maxwell going to testify? You remember Mark Richards, that gentleman over from the Kyle Rittenhouse case? The infamous lawyer now not guilty on all counts. He chimed in. He's got some opinions about putting people on the stand. Remember, he did that with Kyle Rittenhouse. And so he got asked about this for the Ghislaine Maxwell case. And so we've got Laura Menninger for the defense, who does a lot of the cross-examination of Annie Farmer today. We're going to also take a listen to Annie Farmer's ex-boyfriend, guy by the name of David Mulligan. He was called into court to testify, as was Annie's mother. And so, boy, we've got a docket update. The case is being turned over to the defense now. And so the prosecution is already trying to stop the defense from calling forward some of their witnesses that they've already disclosed that they intend to call. And so, boy, we've got a lot to get to. If you want to be a part of the show, the place to do that is over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. We've got an amazing community over there. A lot of fun stuff takes place there. We have our monthly locals meetup that's taking place tomorrow. We've got our Ugly Sweaters event. I've got mine right here. And so if you want to be a part of that, check that out at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. There's also a form that looks like this. And so if you've got any questions, please feel free to use that form. If you're a member, you get a link to the form. And today we've got a special poll form. So if you're over on YouTube, or if you're actually in watchingthewatchers.locals.com, there is a poll form that you can use to answer a question. The question is, of course, did prosecutors fumble the Ghislaine Maxwell trial? These are the poll results as it stands right now. 18% say don't know, 81% say yes. Out of all the responses, not a single person says no, they didn't. So the consensus seems to be that, yes, they did fumble the case thus far. But we're going to continue to see these responses roll in throughout the show. And with this form, I can actually just sort of change the question and we can ping everybody. And if you're having the form open, then we can go through and update the question and take a look. And so weigh in as the show. It's sort of like a real-time, game where hey, what do you think about this? Pick up your clicker and press that button. We're going to try that today. It's Friday. We're going to have some fun. Okay, so we've got that. We've got the form. We've got clips that are all going over at at Robert Gruler ESQ. Oh my gosh, I'm like a broken record over here. You can see we've got a lot of the clips here. We have a massive Ghislaine Maxwell playlist, and so you can check out all of that. Something like 60 videos, I think we're getting up to, of the Ghislaine Maxwell coverage. And so we've got to get into the news of the day. Ghislaine Maxwell trial, day 9 and day 10. We're going to start with day 9 because it wasn't much of a day at all. In fact, it was like maybe a quarter of a day, if that. Here we have a headline from New York Post. They tell us that the trial yesterday for Ghislaine Maxwell was abruptly cut short. Lawyer got sick. And so we're going to go through this. Judge Alison Nathan came out about 10:30 a.m. and said a lawyer was ill, needs to get care. So, don't really know much more other than that, other than ill and needs to get care. No reason to believe it's COVID related. And the jury was sent out for the day. The New York Southern District Attorney's Office, they came out and they posted this statement. They told everybody, well, today's testimony is adjourned and it's scheduled to resume tomorrow due to the illness of an attorney in the case. We urge you to respect the privacy of all the parties in this litigation and not to disclose the identity of that attorney. An update will follow as to when the trial will resume. Thank you. So we don't know much about it, saying that it's not COVID, but we do know that trial took place today. So it was either one of those really weird 24-hour bugs, and there are those bugs, right? It may not be a respiratory illness. It may not be COVID. It may not be something that, requires somebody to, spend 3 or 4 days in bed. It could just be a stomach bug that, you go home, take some Pepto-Bismol, have a rough night, come back the next morning. Woo, I'm better. Let's go, Judge. So it could have been something like that. I don't know. And it's definitely not appropriate to pry into that, what attorney that could be, because nobody likes those types of issues. And we want to respect everybody's privacy, of course. But my question was, how are people getting sick in this courtroom if this is what the courtroom looks like? I mean, everywhere you go in New York, my understanding is it's like COVID, insanity everywhere. Vaccines in and out of, every single turn. But this was in the courtroom. I mean, this is what it looks like. You've got plexiglass bubbles for everybody in the courtroom. And, it's kind of, you don't see a lot of this. A lot of the sketch artists have been leaving out the COVID bubbles, but apparently this is going on in there. Everybody's masked up, but people are still getting sick. So that's too bad. Here's another artist rendering. Looks like we still can see some of the COVID bubble. Maybe we were mistaking that for, I don't know, panes of glass or something. But yeah, it's the COVID bubble that, you can imagine would exist in New York. Judge Nathan said the trial would continue on Friday. It did. Thursday's proceedings began about 9:45 a.m. after several jurors arrived late. And so we're going to do a calculation later on in the show. We're going to ask ourselves, how much time has been invested by the prosecutors in this case in prosecuting this case? Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein, the most prolific trafficking case in, maybe ever, involving potentially presidents, heads of state from all over the world, the prince, some of the most high-profile people on the whole planet. The most high-profile case involving these charges that I can think of. And we're done in 2 weeks. And if you really add the time up, kind of less than that, because we have 1 day for opening argument, so you can delete that day. We have another day for the sick day. So if we started, we're going to look at a calendar later on, but if you calculate it, if we had 10 trial days over the last 2 weeks, 5 days a week, you take out opening day, opening arguments, and you take out the sick day, 10 minus 2 equals 8, if I can math correctly, and I'm not too good at it. So you had got 8 days, but they're not even full days. Remember that Judge Alison Nathan is excusing everybody at 5 p.m. And if jurors are showing up, this has been a repeat thing, by the way. We've seen a lot of this. They show up late regularly. So if they're showing up late, 9:45 to 5 p.m., jurors are late every day. Oh, well, whatever, train problems. We saw the other day a juror, I think it was 45 minutes late, something like that. So you're not even really getting full days. So you take that 10 days, subtract the 2, now you're down to 8. Now you subtract, a couple hours from all of the other days. It's like 7.5 days of the government's testimony. Here was a photograph of Jeff Paliuka. The G is silent like lasagna. He's walking into court. I think this was yesterday. So he didn't look too sick. Here's Bobby Sternheim. She's masked up, got those AirPods on, got the gloves on. It's cold there in New York. And so they made their way into court. Testimony picked up yesterday with Laura Menninger. Laura Menninger, of course, representing Ghislaine Maxwell, one of her 5 attorneys. And she was clarifying with the court, asking specifically about Annie Farmer, who we heard from today. Used her full name. Yep, Annie Farmer is going to come in and testify. This was yesterday. Prosecutors did not raise an objection. So when the full name was used, no problem. so we can go ahead and use it. This is one of the victims where we can just be okay with discussing it. And so we're going to take a quick look. Let's pause here before we get into the actual testimony and revisit the mind map, which is available over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com, just so we can get our bearings straight and see where specifically the different individuals who testified over the course of yesterday and today, where they're sort of situated in the grand scheme of things. So a reminder that if you are a member over there, you can go and see this form for yourself. And at some point, maybe next week, I may go ahead and make this public just because I'm kind of irritated with a lot of this. Okay, so let's take a quick look. I make sure I got a lot of this closed out. All right, so here is the mind map that we've spent a lot of time talking about. So we can close some of this up. We know that we can zoom all the way out. We have this entire Epstein wing, this entire contingent of victims and unnamed co-conspirators and all of that stuff. We're going to close that up here just for this quick minute. We are going to close up. You can see that we've sort of changed some of this around. So today I moved a lot of these witnesses into different categories. So you can see here, we now have a transactional category. And we heard from yesterday morning, we heard from the FedEx paralegal. We're also going to hear today from an MVD employee. These are really transactional witnesses. They're talking about, moving things around and moving money around and that type of stuff. Then we're going to hear mostly from Annie Farmer. The rest of our day is spent in this wing. And remember that Annie Farmer is really the fourth victim that we've heard from. And the judge gave us a prior ruling from her about her and said that the intercourse that took place, any of those activities that took place in New Mexico, were not illegal. The judge said that. That was an instruction. She's using her real name, so we get a lot of testimony from her. So we'll spend a lot of the day, most of the day, talking about her today. And then at the very end, we heard from her boyfriend, who is a baker. I think this is a ciabatta bread. And then you have a mother, obviously very loving, warm embrace here in this photograph. And so that's not actually them, but it's all I could find from mom. So that's who we've got here today. We have a lot more to go because we have not heard anything from the defense yet. We're going to do a full breakdown of everybody, in this entire mind map in a separate video, just going through the full thing at the close of the government's case. Now we're at the case in chief has been concluded for the government, and so we can see all of their different all of their different witnesses. So, but you can see it's just a big, massive list. We've got everybody from the law that was over as part of the Palm Beach residence. We've got a lot of the employees. We have the FBI agents who were involved down in New York. And so this is a continual work in progress. We're going to continue to build this out. And so make sure you are following along. All right. So now that we know who we're talking about, let's get into the actual testimony of the day. And we're going to be picking this up with the FedEx person named Tracy Chappell. Tracy Chappell, and remember, this was yesterday, but we're going to kind of consolidate this into one. Yesterday, jury enters. All rise. First witness of the day is Tracy Chappell. She's a senior paralegal over at FedEx. The witness is shown an invoice, a redacted form of which will be made public. So it's basically just a paralegal, somebody who works in the legal department who's going to be helping with records. Oh, you work there. You know how you do these things. When this invoice comes in, what do you do with it? Right? X, Y, and Z happens. Okay. So then we continue on. This witness, according to Adam Klasfeld, is to authenticate invoices associated with Jeffrey Epstein, all from the last few months of 2002. And why are we spending time on FedEx? Remember that a lot of the allegations here are about grooming, that Epstein was sending people all sorts of stuff, jewelry and makeup and perfume and clothes, $1,000 dresses, this, that, and the other, flying people all over the place, sending them to art school, sending them to the children's school in New York. The list goes on and on. So they bring in this FedEx person, and now they're going to confirm that there are certain transactions happening. Cross-examination takes place. Defense lawyer Laura Menninger comes out and says, okay, well, taking a look at these records that you're talking about, these invoices, there seems to be one name on here. Looks like that's S. Kellen. Who is S. Kellen? Says Laura Menninger. Well, guess who that is? If we go back over to the mind map and we take a look at it, well, that was one of Jeffrey Epstein's co-conspirators. And so if we zoom out a little bit, Sarah Kellen If we go down and open up the Jeffrey Epstein wing, Sarah Kellen is right here. You can see her just above my photograph. Sarah Kellen is one of Jeffrey Epstein's named co-conspirators who is a part of the 2007 non-prosecution agreement. Named in there, so she can't be prosecuted. And so Ghislaine Maxwell is doing everything that she can in her power. You can see that her name is right here. We've talked about her many times, Sarah Kellen. Sarah Kellen is also basically what Ghislaine Maxwell and her team are trying to do is they're trying to say any one of these other people are responsible for these evil deeds. Sarah Kellen's responsible for it. Why? Because you can see her name on the FedEx invoice. We heard yesterday from Paliuka that when he was talking to somebody else, he said, well, the first name of somebody who's a victim in this case, it starts with one of these names, doesn't it? Right. And so we don't know what he's talking about. I mean, we do know what he's talking about. We know exactly who he's talking about, but the jurors do. He's just being coy about it. But he's saying, oh, no, it wasn't Maxwell who forced Jane to go do these things. It was one of these other named co-conspirators. Why? Because one of the named co-conspirators shares the same first name as Jane. And it's not Sarah Kellen because Sarah Kellen's already been brought up. We're using her name. So it's one of these other people has the same first name as Jane. So the defense is constantly, it's not Maxwell, it's Nadia Marcinkova, it's Leslie Groff, it's Adriana Ross, it's Sarah Kellen. They're all co-conspirators. They're all responsible for this. It's obvious because they're listed in a non-prosecution agreement from 2007. It's written there in the document. They can hang their hat on that. Okay, so we know who Sarah Kellen is. We go back here. It says, note, these are little bits of evidence that pass by, nobody notices. Defense attorneys put these pieces together in summation. What he's telling us is it's very difficult to follow along because we can't really see what they're talking about. So after yesterday, we know everybody's sick. So Adam Classfield, he's reporting. He's just, busy typing away, reporting away, doing excellent work. And he has to take a break. Oh, Judge Nathan, they sent the jurors out for a break. And weird, their parties are going to go confer in the judge's robing room. They're going to have a conversation. Now the juries are gone. Now the parties are in the robing room. All rise. Jury comes back and enters. Judge Nathan tells the juries, well, you're going to hate this, everybody. Sorry for the trouble here, but I've been informed that there's an attorney in this case who is ill. She said they've got no reason to believe it's COVID or anything, but we're going to be done for the day. And so the jurors left for the day. That was it. They were done by like 10:30, I think, 10:30, 11. Early day, so we didn't have much to talk about. Yesterday, we spent the day talking about Jussie Smollett, guilty of 5 of 6 counts, and so we had plenty to talk about, but trial was pretty short. Today, we picked back up. Good news, everybody's doing fine. Attorneys healed up. They took some Pepto-Bismol or whatever it needed to happen, and they're back in business. Court starts today. Judge Nathan. Jury enters. All rise. Judge Nathan reports an update to the jury. Says, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to report that all the attorneys are here today. Everyone is doing well. Prosecution reads a stipulation into the record attesting to the authenticity of certain exhibits. Stipulation means an agreement. We agree that these are authentic. We don't need to fight about them. We're just going to get them in there. There you go. First witness of the day comes out. This guy is William Brown. He works over at the DMV for the state of New York. Not going to be very interesting. Inner City Press is reporting on this as well. Prosecutor comes out. I believe it's Adam Rohrbach this time. Haven't heard much from this fella, but he is now participating in the trial. He comes out and says, all right, Mr. Brown, are you aware how people receive ID cards? Yeah, I work at the DMV. He says, okay, well, great. Please pick up the folder next to you. It's a sealed government exhibit, so we're not going to see any of it. They go through. He identifies an ID. He's going to talk about who it is, blah, blah, blah. He's sort of just a record-keeping person. Happens all the time. You bring him in. Can you authenticate this for me? This is an ID card. Can you just tell me that this is the real thing? I work at the MVD. This is what I look for. This is the process that we go through. It's the real thing. That ID is real. Okay, that's who they say. Okay, fine. Judge Nathan says, all right, well, I'm going to admit these exhibits under seal. We take a look at Defense Exhibit LD3A. All right. It's right there in the binder. How old in 1996 was this person? This person, born in 1985. Well, 11 years old, says Brown. 11 years old in born 1985, 1996, 11 years old. No cross-examination, next witness. We're just getting somebody's age. All right, so pretty simple witness. Nothing really even that interesting there. Now we're done with that stuff. Now we get into the final victim. This is Annie Farmer. Here's what it looked like in court. First thing you're going to notice, Annie Farmer, we can see her facial expressions. The judge has not given an order for the sketch artist to eliminate that. And so we don't have blank faces that look like a smeared sketch of pastel across a person's forehead. We now have facial features. And she doesn't look too happy about this, right? This woman has been fighting her butt off against these people for a long time. She's been courageously doing it under her name, and she is now in court testifying under her name. Here's how it sounded. Next witness is up. Prosecutor comes out. Believe it's Laura Pomerantz. Laura Pomerantz comes out. Your Honor, the government calls Annie Farmer. Nathan says, as the courtroom braces, the wind sort of gets sucked out of the front door. Annie Farmer may come forward. She does. She stands up there, spells her name. The judge gives a limiting instruction to the jury, telling the jurors that the allegations about, quote, physical contact between Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein in New Mexico were not illegal. She was 16 at the time there. Remember this? This is why we marked this down over on the mind map. This is why we said specifically that she's sort of kind of like half of a victim now. Remember, when we go back to Annie Farmer, we've got two victims where the judge gave an instruction to Kate. The judge read into an instruction on the record, according to Klassfeld and others, that Kate is, quote, not a victim of the indictment. Nothing there that she's going to talk about makes her a victim of the indictment, is how we've read that argument. Same concept here for Annie Farmer. The physical contact between her and Epstein and her and Maxwell is not illegal. We just read that from the judge. Now, when you go over to the indictment, part of that is because they're not a minor. And so how do you have crimes involving trafficking if they're not minors and the actual physical allocation, a physical contact, is not in fact illegal? These different charges, we'll see what the jury does with it. Okay, so we are now talking back about Annie Farmer. She is testifying in court. Spells her last name. Judge says anything with the physical contact, not illegal. Prosecutor goes on. Laura says, can you see anyone in the courtroom here who has ever given you a massage, Annie? Farmer identifies Maxwell. Yeah, Ghislaine Maxwell has. Thank you. Can you tell me about your career, Miss Farmer? So she talks about her family's financial situation growing up, saying, money was tight. Often it was a stressor since my parents were divorced. Asked about her career, she goes on. She talks about her siblings, talks about Maria Farmer, her sister. Prosecutor Pomerantz asks her to dig in a little bit. Tell me where you were born, Annie. Well, I was born in Missouri. And you've got your PhD, is that right? Yes, I do. And where'd you get your PhD? Well, I got that at the University of Texas at Austin. And how old were you when Maxwell gave you a massage? Well, I was 16. Family finances again, talks about an older sister, Maria, 9 years older. She was living in New York City. She was the one working with Epstein. When she was growing up, had a lot of concerns about how college would be paid for. Parents were divorced. When Annie's traveling back and forth, remember her sister's in New York, she says that Epstein purchased a ticket for her, for Annie. Maria's working for him already, so it's not much trouble for Epstein to just purchase a ticket over for Annie as well. She says, I was really excited about that. I got to go see my sister. And Epstein was also, objection, the defense says. Epstein was going to say, what? No, you don't get to say that. That's a hearsay. That's an out-of-court statement. Objection is sustained. She doesn't get to go into what Epstein is talking about. Specifically, Inner City Press was saying that Laura asked her, okay, so how'd you travel to New York? And Annie just goes off and says, Jeffrey Epstein paid. I was excited to see my father. Jeffrey Epstein had said, can't say it, right? That's the statement. That's Jeffrey Epstein's out-of-court statement. That's hearsay. Can't come in. Defense objects. It's sustained. That question is not allowed. Annie Farmer says she met Epstein in New York, but didn't meet Maxwell there. So again, we're talking about Epstein in New York, but not Maxwell. It goes on. Prosecutor Laura says, all right, so your sister was in New York. You were talking about Epstein. I know we got an objection to that statement. Let me ask you a different question. What did your sister say to you about the trip to New York? Objection again. That's hearsay. That's her sister's statement that's out of court. She's saying something. She's not here in court. She's saying something, and we're talking about that statement. That's hearsay. Prosecutor says, yeah. But it's about the effect on the listener. There's an exception to that rule. And then the judge gets into it with them. Is this what we discussed? Did we talk about this? Okay, I'm going to let it in within the scope, and I'll tell the juror that this is not offered for the truth. So I'm going to give him a limiting instruction. She can tell the jurors what the sister told her, but it's only for how that statement impacted the sister. It's not anything to do with any of the truth of the statement. So now that Annie got a very nice plane ticket to go visit her sister, Prosecutor Pomerantz says, all right, Annie, well, who did you thank for your ticket? I mean, somebody bought you this nice ticket. Who'd you thank for that? Annie says, Epstein. Maxwell's lawyers jump in there. Objection! Hearsay. Scream it again. Multiple objections. 3 in a row with this prosecutor. Back to back. Pomerantz says, all right. I'll move on. Not allowed to get that Epstein conversation out. Prosecutor says, I'll move on. Let me ask you some more poignant questions. Did you meet Jeffrey Epstein? Farmer says, yes. Twice during this trip. Thank you, Ms. Farmer. Okay, we're going to show the witness here, the parties, the court government exhibit number 101. Can you pull that up for us here, please? They pull it up to the screen. We don't know what it is, but here's another sketch rendering of Annie Farmer in court looking at something on a screen. We don't know what that is, but it's going to be something there. And so testimony continues. And now that we have some facial expressions, she's certainly, a hard day for anybody in a position like this. It continues. The photograph is a photograph of herself. It's from around the time she met Epstein. She said she was 16 years old in this photo. We're going back to the very time. Prosecutor Pomerantz, says, where did you meet Epstein? At his home. It was a very grand home. At the time, I was staying with my sister in her apartment. Well, how'd that make you feel when you met him? Well, I was excited. He was very friendly with me. I mean, he seemed really down to earth. He was very nice when I met him. And he was telling me that he could help me. And I was thrilled about that. My family didn't have much money. He had a beautiful home. It was kind of a dream. What did he ask you about when you were over there, when you were talking with Epstein? How'd that conversation go? And he says, well, my plans, things I wanted to do. He suggested UCLA. He said he had connections and things like that. He was also thinking that maybe I should go on an international trip to sort of kind of boost my application, give me some credibility. What else did you guys do, Annie? We went to see the movie 5 Monkeys. Maybe 12 Monkeys. And when you went to see that movie with Bruce Willis, where did he sit? Well, he sat between me and us, and things got a little bit strange there. That's when he rubbed my leg. Rubbed your leg, huh? Well, what was your reaction to that, Miss Farmer? I was very surprised, honestly. I mean, I felt sick to my stomach. Don't know where that came from. My sister, Maria, is sitting right over on the other side, and he's rubbing my leg. And Maria works for Jeffrey Epstein, and I'm just a sister. I just got invited out to New York. We're just going to go see a movie with Bruce Willis. It's a great movie. Brad Pitt's in it. Annie Farmer says, when my sister would look over, when Maria would see it, then he would stop And then as soon as Maria would look away, then he'd begin again. Pomerantz says, did you tell your sister? She works for him. Did you tell him? Tell her? Farmer says, no, I was confused. I knew she was protective. I knew she would be upset. She might lose her job. If she goes and tells Epstein, maybe he fires her. Maybe he gets mad at me. He's got all this money. I was scared to death, so I just decided not to say anything. Nothing at all. Inner City Press reports, Prosecutor Pomerantz says, oh, thank you, Ms. Farmer. Did you write anything down? Did you write in a journal? Did you keep notes? Farmer says, I did. Well, tell us about that. What did you do? Can you describe your journaling for us? Sure. Well, I wasn't a consistent journaler, but I would sometimes write down, things that were happening in my life, and I did keep them in logs, and I have them available, and they have them available. And so, boom, prosecutor moves. I'd like to submit exhibit whatever. It's journal entry, so-and-so. That goes up on the screen, and Annie Farmer is going to read through these. She reads from it, including about going to see Phantom of the Opera. She had champagne with Epstein. Then we have a later entry. We went to the movies with Epstein. She notes in that entry, I was weirded out. He let go of my hand when he was talking to Maria. Pomerantz says, Ms. Farmer, when you were writing this down in your journal, how'd you feel about Epstein? She says, I was conflicted. I knew it was not normal. I knew it wasn't right, but I was trying to make it seem okay. Annie goes back to her journal. Says, I'm thinking of doing something in Africa. It be incredible. Classfield gives us a little bit more. When they went to Phantom of the Opera and then a movie, the language that Annie said was that he caressed her hand. She wasn't expecting it at all. She read from her diary, says, the best night was when Maria and I saw Phantom of the Night. Her review at the time says, quote, I bawled. It was fantastic. I was so moved. Beautiful play. She reads from another entry. This journal entry was back in 1996. You see why we get the question about 1996 and about somebody who's born at a certain time? Couple of quick details about New York that I didn't mention earlier is what she wrote down in this entry. She wrote down that she knew what it sounded like. She was, quote, trying to justify him doing something weird, but it isn't. Reflecting on what she wrote now, she says, I was just trying to come up with an excuse or a justification to try to make it feel okay. She said throughout the night he was caressing, rubbing her arm, shoe, and her foot. She said it was a little bit weird. One of those things that was hard to explain. But I kept trying to justify it and make it seem like it was okay. Annie Farmer's direct exam continues. They now switch over to New Mexico. Prosecutor says, how did you get out there? Says, well, I flew commercially. I think it was about the beginning of spring 1996, sometime in April. And is that where you next saw Jeffrey Epstein? Yes, it was in New Mexico. And Laura Pomerantz says, and what did you think you'd be seeing out there when you went and saw him, Annie? Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyer's objection. Foundation, lack of foundation, calls for speculation, sustained. Here is another screen sketch of the trial to date. You can see Laura Pomerantz. We've got photographs of Jeffrey Epstein. We've got Annie Farmer, again in her glasses, again looking down, going through these exhibits, reading from her journal, and so on. Ghislaine Maxwell's in court, masked up, as is Judge Nathan. Inner City Press carries on, says, when you landed in New Mexico, then what happened next? You flew there commercially. It was April 1996. What happened next? Well, when I landed, there was a man. He was standing outside the airport with a sign with my name on it. Drove us to a ranch. Epstein's ranch. It was there that I met Ghislaine Maxwell. She was slim, attractive. She was in her 30s. She was an adult. Laura asked, well, what does she sound like? She had a British accent. I'd been told that Maxwell would be there in New Mexico, and It made me more comfortable. After what happened in New York, Jeffrey Epstein was feeling my leg up in the movies. I was a little bit concerned about traveling out there, but I knew that Ghislaine was going to be there. Ghislaine is a female. I'll be safer there. And who told you that Maxwell was going to be there? Annie says, my mother. Huh. Annie, when you got there, what did you and Miss Maxwell talk about? So we know you met Jeffrey, but what about Maxwell? Annie says, we talked about my life, my school, and British authors. Did you ever leave the ranch when you were there? It's kind of in the middle of nowhere. I think it was 120 acres. You ever go anywhere? Yeah, we went to a nature food store one time. Maxwell brought me henna. And we went to a Western wear store. I had some cowboy boots that were also purchased for me. Cowboy boots that were purchased for me. Let's put a pin in that one. Cowboy boots. Classfield gives us a little bit more color. Talks about Maxwell as being very well spoken, very articulate, saying that her being there was a very good thing. Miss Farmer, what was your impression about the Ghislaine Maxwell and the Jeffrey Epstein relationship? What did you think of these two? She says, I thought that they were romantic partners. They appeared to be intimate with each other. And remember why this is important. We went through a lot of pictures in this channel showing that, asking ourselves, is Ghislaine Maxwell a villain? Is she a participant? Is she in cahoots with Jeffrey Epstein? Are they yin and yang? Are they two peas in a pod? Or is she the victim? Is Jeffrey Epstein the sole proprietor of this enterprise? And Ghislaine is just a victim. We've had a number of different witnesses come out, including Annie Farmer here, saying, thought that they were a couple, they were inseparable, everywhere they went, they were together. She's buttressing that line of questioning that we've heard throughout the entirety of this trial. The defense is trying to do the opposite. They weren't intimate at all. She was a victim. She was forced to give him foot massages. She was held captive, and so on. We turn back to these boots, though. Classfield says, she describes being bought the boots. So, who bought those boots for you? Well, Epstein did. And who was present for you when those boots were being purchased? Well, Maxwell was. We got some troubling boots coming up. Annie continues, says, yeah, while we were there, we also went to the movies again. But this time Maxwell came. Says, I didn't want to go because the experience the last time was problematic, to say the least, but I thought this time it might be different. Of course, Maxwell's there. And so we went to see the movie called Primal Fear. Haven't seen that one. He right away tried to hold my hand and caress and hold my foot and my arm, Annie Farmer says. Guess Maxwell didn't stop that at all. How much of the movie did he touch you for? Says Laura. Most of it, if not all of it. I mean, he didn't even hide it. And afterwards, back at the ranch, Maxwell told me to rub his feet, and then he'd show me, and then we get into all of this. Back to those boots. How much did those boots cost there? Annie says they were over $100. I was grateful. I was gracious. But then this movie stuff happened. Back at the ranch, Maxwell told me to rub his feet, and she was going to show me how to do it. And then later, she told me to get undressed, and then she started rubbing on me. I thought I was the masseuse. Then it gets a little bit more troubling. Annie Farmer says that Ghislaine Maxwell sat down. She actually held one of Epstein's feet, one of Epstein's feet, and instructed her to massage the other. Ghislaine sits down, starts doing the massage that we saw a little bit of a preview on when she was on the plane previously. Says, Annie, come on over here, grab that other leg, and start rubbing on that one. I just watched what she was doing, and she instructed me. And so I just did what she told me to do, says Annie. I felt very uncomfortable. I wanted to stop. I was hoping it'd be over quickly. I was shocked. I was in total panic and fear. Then this is when it really goes bad. Maxwell, says Laura, did she ever give you a massage, Annie? Yeah, She did. Annie says she set up a table in the room where she was staying. And what were you wearing during this massage? Nothing. Why not? Well, Maxwell told me to get undressed. Who did? Ghislaine Maxwell did. She told me to take my clothes off. She did, yeah. Ghislaine did, yeah. And so you lied down, right? And what happened when you were lying on your back? Annie says that Maxwell pulled the sheet down and started to touch her. Annie Farmer recalled having this weird sense that Epstein might be watching her during this massage. Laura asks Annie, how did that make you feel? Annie says, I wanted to get off the table. I wanted out of there. The door was open. I had the sense Epstein could see. In the morning, Epstein came into my room and he said he wanted to cuddle. He climbed into bed with me. I didn't like it at all. Annie, did you tell him when he was in your... Did you tell him that? Annie says no. Why not? There was no one else around. So you laid there. Yeah. And what happened next? All the bad stuff in the world. After that, what happened after that? I went into the bathroom and I shut the door. Did you want to cuddle with Epstein? No, I didn't. We move on. Annie Farmer then describes moving back home to Phoenix. Shout out. Asked if she wrote in her journal about her trip to New Mexico. She says no. Says, I didn't want to think about it. Laura says, Annie, you have this memorabilia from your trip to New Mexico. Those boots. Those boots that Ghislaine and Jeffrey Epstein, the people who abused you, bought you. Why did you keep those boots, Annie? Well, she said, look, at first I just shoved them in the back of the closet. Agents asked, they came and they said, do you have the boots? And she said that she found them and, that I wore the boots. And I kept the boots. They were nice, but they were $100 boots. They were nice boots. So yeah, I kept them. First, they were in the back of my closet. But yeah, I did keep them. Prosecutor says, okay, well, tell me about this. Let's talk about where you went in 1996. Where was that? Annie says, I went to Thailand. I went to Vietnam. Oh, well, that sounds fun. What for? Well, that was for cultural immersion. They show a photo on the screen. Annie Farmer, there's a small elephant. There's a wooden seat on it. A very beautiful animal. Laura Pomerantz says, well, that seems like a nice trip. Who paid for that? Annie says Epstein did. Sending her overseas in 1996. Pomerantz continues. Any more contact with Maxwell and Epstein since then? No. When we rewind the clock on this, who was the first person you told when this type of stuff happened? Well, my mother, generally speaking. Prosecutor says, well, and what did you tell your mom? Maxwell's lawyers, objection, you can't say that. What did you tell your mom? What? Objection. They go and they have a sidebar. They go up, they talk to the judge. They're whispering. Maxwell remains alone at the defense table. She's rubbing her arm. She's wearing an orange and pink sweater today. They come back from the sidebar, not going to answer that question. Okay, not going to ask that. What did you tell your mom? Objection. Comes back. No repeat. Did you tell anyone else? Changes direction. Annie Farmer says, yeah, I had a boyfriend and I told him. We're going to hear from him. He testifies right after she does. Farmer says, Pomerantz says, did you speak to the media? And he says, yeah, I did many times. When did that start? Well, back in 2002 and basically consistently since then. How about law enforcement? Did you ever talk to law enforcement about this case, Annie? Yeah. to the FBI. When was that? From 2006 to maybe 2007. Prosecutor continues. How about since all this happened? Have you spoken with the media more recently? Yeah, I did. Off the record, I had a conversation in 2016. And then on the record, I had a conversation in 2019. Says Annie. Laura says, thank you for sharing that. Were you paid for those interviews, by the way? No, I wasn't. And you were interviewed by law enforcement here in New York? Annie says, yeah, I was. It was also in 2019. It was in the fall. That's when I was suing Epstein and Maxwell. And did you participate in the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund, Annie? Yeah, I did. I was awarded $1.5 million. My lawyers were pro bono, so they didn't take a cut. And the prosecutor finishes with this one. Do you have any financial stake in the outcome of this trial, Annie? Annie Farmer says no. So we get the cross-examination that's going to start from Miss Bobby Sternheim in a second. Here is another photograph. We heard from Annie Farmer that she was testifying against Maxwell previously, sued them multiple times. This is a prior sketch from when Maxwell was back in court. Remember, he was being prosecuted previously. That's where he allegedly didn't kill himself. So this is a sketch from back then. And so Annie's been fighting this case for a long time, and this is her day in court. Testimony continues. When you came back after that trip, after the assault took place, what'd you do about that? Did you talk to your mom about any of this stuff? I told my mother I was not assaulted, and I didn't want to talk about it, is what she said. Did you tell the FBI that Maxwell gave you a massage? Yeah, I did. And back during that interview, you sort of used the word reclaim your boots. You said you wanted to reclaim your boots by wearing them again. What does that mean? Well, it was a dark memory, and I had felt so taken advantage of by both of them that I wanted to reclaim that. Farmer says, I had a lot of problems coming forward because it was just a shameful memory. But, you know, I want accountability, and I want these people being stopped. I have no financial stake in any of this stuff, she says, and cross-examination starts. So Laura Pomerantz for the government finishes the direct examination of Annie Farmer, our final victim in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. We have cross-examination now, starts by Ghislaine Maxwell's defense attorney, Laura Menninger, and here's how that sounded. Menninger walks out, and you can see we're doing the pairs again, so gender to gender. Menninger comes out and says, good to see you. Good afternoon, Miss Farmer. I want to clarify something here today. Your sister is the one who arranged the travel to New York, right? Maxwell didn't do that. Your sister did that. Annie Farmer says, yeah, that's right. Menninger says, you told the FBI that flying alone was not abnormal for you also, right? Annie says, yeah, I usually had my younger sister with me when I flew to visit my father. Menninger says, I got the report right here. It says that you said that flying alone was not abnormal for you, right? Here's the report. Annie Farmer finally says, yeah, I see it. It says that. Thank you. Menninger continues. And so we're getting very clear here. You're saying that Ghislaine Maxwell had no role in your travel to New York, right? None of that. Annie Farmer says she did not. And you believe that Mr. Epstein purchased your plane ticket, right? Farmer says yes. This is the trafficking portion of this. Maxwell didn't traffic anybody. There's no conspiracy to traffic any of this stuff. Epstein bought the ticket, and Farmer's sister was a person who purchased the flight or coordinated the flight. Epstein's money, her sister is the travel agent. Menninger says, you also saw the Blue Man Group. You went to flea markets with your sister, right? Farmer says, yeah. And in New York, Miss Maxwell didn't take you to the Lion King. Is that also correct? Farmer says she did not. Maxwell's lawyer continues. She's able to establish that there's no sexual contact in the New York home that's being alleged. Asks Annie, no one showed you any of those torpedoes or those buzzers or anything like that, right? No. And Maxwell wasn't even there. She was never there. Isn't that also true? That's true. Here, these are the allegations Classfield tells us about the New York movie theater and the New Mexico movie theater and the ranch. Menninger continues. You know those journal entries, right? You wrote down something about the Phantom of the Opera. You said that was the best night of your trip. Yeah, I remember that. Menninger says, do these journal entries help you remember details and emotions and things that maybe you otherwise might have forgotten? And Farmer says, yeah. And so Menninger is just going to toy with this for a while. So like if you wrote something down maybe 10 years ago, you don't remember that thing, you could look back and it would remind you about what happened, wouldn't it? And it would remind you about those emotions. And it would be probably a little bit more accurate back then than maybe it is currently because it's sort of a more real-time present sense impression, isn't it? Okay. Menninger then points out, goes back through Farmer's journal entry, talking about these actions in the movie theater. Epstein's actions were categorized by Farmer as, quote, weird and also not weird. Menninger says, well, how do you feel about it now? Right now. I still find it weird, says Annie. And your memories today are colored by hindsight, right? Annie says, of course they are. Menninger continues, without a journal entry from the New Mexico trip, we can't confirm who invited you there with a piece of paper. Right? And Annie says, with a piece of paper? No. Menninger says that without a journal, there's no piece of paper confirming what happened in New Mexico and how she felt about it. Farmer agrees with her, as qualifying it with a, quote, a piece of paper confirmation. And so Menninger sort of saying, oh, you wrote down all these other journal entries. You spent a lot of time writing about all these other things. You said it was the best night of your life. You said you did this, that, and the other. But here, you didn't write anything about this one. Menninger says that Farmer recalled the date of that trip by researching when the film called Primal Fear came out and was working backwards. I don't think I would say it that way. So in other words, what Menninger is saying is, you see what she's doing? She's saying that Farmer wrote all this stuff down. There are giant gaps, and she, after the fact, went and sort of filled in those gaps in the future and went back and sort of has hindsight to fill in those gaps, saying, I didn't know exactly when this happened, but I went back and it was Primal Fear, so I went and looked that up and I pieced the rest of this all together. And so part of my memory that I'm testifying about today, part of that is from my journal, part of that's from my memory, and part of it's this other stuff that I just kind of went around and filled in the gaps, like looking up when Primal Fear happened and all this other stuff. And so the memory, which is the second of our three themes here, memory, money, and manipulation, are, of course, it's a key element. The memory's all bad. So Laura Menninger is trying to break that down. We have another little bit of insight from Inner City Press. He continues and says, you wrote about a cross-country skiing trip and going to see bands in a bar. I mean, you wrote that in your journal, right? So, like, you talked about your emotions after returning from New York, what a great time you had there. And so you wrote a lot of stuff about skiing and bands and drinking and dancing and cross-country trips and hotels and all this stuff. But nothing about that trip in New Mexico. Weird. Menninger says, so in your journal, you said what Epstein did in the movie theater was also not weird, right? You said that in your journal, didn't you? Annie says, yeah, I said it was not weird, but I was struggling. And so you were only calling it weird in hindsight then, is what you're saying. So you're saying it's weird now. Back then you said it was not weird. And so you went back and you looked up the movie Primal Fear and you're filling in the gaps. Back then you said it was not weird. Now you're saying it's weird. right? She's saying, well, I was struggling. Menninger says, okay, fine. Let's go to Exhibit 604. This is the last journal entry that you gave to the government for this case, right? Annie Farmer says, yes. And you never gave the government the full journal, did you? The full thing, so that we could take a look at it, so that we could corroborate it and see what else is in there. But you never gave them the full thing, did you? No, I didn't. Menninger continues, and so you actually went back and you researched primal fear. You saw that you didn't remember much about this, and so you looked it up and said, when did it come out so you could fill it in? She says, well, I wouldn't say that I did it that way. And so Menninger says, fine, let me say it a different way for you then. How about this, Annie? You communicated with a journalist, and you told him you'd research the release date of primal fear, right? Annie Farmer says yes. So now you see where this is going. These journalists are coming out, and she has to go back and create a story now to facilitate a journalist's desire to have a story. She didn't remember it. A journalist is asking her all these questions. A journalist is out there saying, we've got a great story. She's filing lawsuits all over the place. Can't really put it together in her own mind. Picks up a little clue, puts one to one together, and comes up with a conclusion. Well, guess what's going to happen? Well, as soon as we get the defense experts out here to talk about how that's not really a good thing and how the human mind doesn't really work that way, we're going to see if the jury buys any of it. So she continues on, says, you communicated with the journalist, told him you'd research the release date of primal fear. Yes, so you added facts. You built out this into something that maybe wasn't exactly connected to reality. Menninger finishes up. On direct, you didn't mention it, but there was also a cook on the ranch when you were there, right? Farmer says, I don't remember the cook. And you didn't see the big, glorious Zorro ranch at that time either, right? Farmer says, no. Menninger goes back to these boots. Says, you mentioned these boots, but on the trip, you spent a significant amount of time riding horses, right? Annie Farmer says, is that a question? Throwing it back. And she says, you told that to the FBI in 2006, didn't you? Farmer says, yes, I did. So they're getting into it. And Menninger says, are these the boots? Holds them up right in court. Are these the boots? Annie Farmer says, yeah, those are them. And Menninger moves for admission of the boots. The boots are getting admitted. Admit the boots. So the boots are now in evidence, which means the juries can go look at the boots and play around the boots and examine the boots and have all the fun and put them on, if they want to, I suppose. But it carries on. Laura Menninger representing Ghislaine Maxwell. Annie Farmer. So you've got these boots. You decided to wear the boots. Even when you knew that they were evidence in a crime, you wore them frequently. Well, I didn't wear them to work. I wore them when I was two-stepping. I was dancing and I needed boots. Okay, I didn't have any other boots. I was two-stepping. And I can move pretty dang nicely in these boots. So yeah, I wore them. So you wore the boots that Jeffrey Epstein, your assailant and abuser, the man who ruined your life, you wore the boots that Jeffrey Epstein gave you when you went dancing. Okay. Menninger goes on. So in the movie theater that you were weirded out or not weirded out or whatever by, he didn't touch you, in the no-no area, right? He didn't do that, did he? Annie Farmer says, no, he didn't. And you said that you were completely nude for that full body massage, but you only told the journalist that you had no bra on. Prosecutor screams objection, which I'm sure was sustained. Probably dealt with that prior. Menninger says, you said in 2019 you were unsure if you had your underwear on. There's an objection. Nathan overrules it. I'm going to allow that question. It gets asked. Menninger says, and you also don't recall Jeffrey Epstein putting one of those torpedoes in your back, do you? Farmer says, no, I don't recall that either. Manager shifts her attention. Annie, look at this for us over here. You see this document up here? Annie, you told your mother, right, that you were not assaulted. You were not abused, didn't you? Annie says, I said I was not assaulted. Okay, so you actually told your mom that. Got it. Manager also says, so you also told the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund that the hand-handing in the movie theaters, you told them that that was abuse? Yeah, I told them in detail what happened. But you checked the box, New York. So you think that hand-holding is abuse, is that right? I mean, you checked the box that there was abuse in there. That's hand-holding. You said New York. You were in New York. You said that this was abuse. It was just hand-holding. He didn't touch you anywhere else. It was just on the hands. A little weird, except you said it was a little not weird. And you marked when you were going to go get your $1 million compensation that this was abuse, didn't you? So you think that just holding hands in a movie theater is abuse. Because that's what you said in New York when you submitted this to the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund. So if you think just hand holding is abuse, maybe the standards are off a little bit. You said he didn't touch anything. You didn't tell your sister about it. You saw him again multiple times after this fact. You went to the movies with him again. You had to look up when all this happened, when a reporter was asking you about it. Look up primal fear. You were creating memories out of nothing so you can go create a story. You've got multiple lawsuits that are flying all over the place, and you're going to get paid for this, aren't you? And you didn't write about it in your journal, and when your mother asked you about it, you told her specifically, the person that you acknowledge that you talk to on a regular basis, that I was not assaulted. Cross-examination continues. You're also represented by a law firm, right? Boyes Schiller? Yes. You know how much that firm has made in connection with representing Epstein accusers? Judge Nathan objects. Judge Nathan objects. Laura Menninger continues. And she says, and you, and Judge Nathan yells out, stop. Stop. Look at this. Do you know how much that law firm has made in connection representing Epstein accusers? Judge Nathan objects. Menninger says, and you, and Judge Nathan shouts out, stop, stop it, Menninger, stop it right now. Menninger is bold as hell. We got a federal judge screaming at her to stop a line of questioning in court. Menninger continues, Annie, you're also on a WhatsApp group of Epstein friends, one of those group messages. They're very dangerous. Be careful what you send in them. Annie says, yeah, I am. And you've emailed back and forth with Virginia Roberts, haven't you? I have, yeah. Virginia and I have talked a lot about that. Do you recall? Okay, so that finishes up, yeah. And so it ends up with that question. Virginia Roberts is the last question. We get a little bit of redirect exam now. Laura Pomerantz comes out. Ms. Farmer, I'm going to ask you back about those statements that you made to the FBI in 2006. You recall those? Yeah, I do. Can you read the rest of that sentence here in this exhibit? Maxwell's lawyer scream out objection. Judge Nathan overrules them, and this comes in. Annie Farmer reads, they canceled Maria's trip to New Mexico at the last minute. Oh. Annie was supposed to come out with Maria to New Mexico, and they didn't bring Maria. They just brought Annie out there. Because maybe they wanted her isolated. Pomerantz says, yeah, and you mentioned this movie, this film, Primal Fear. Annie Farmer says, yeah, that movie depicts misconduct. Apparently it's a legal thriller about an attorney and his client. Something about murdering a Catholic archbishop. Oh, sounds interesting. So they're talking about that movie. Farmer says, I thought that they were taking me to that movie just to sort of try to confuse me as to the boundaries, as to what's right or wrong in order to abuse me. Maxwell's lawyers scream out objections, and Judge Nathan says it's overruled. So that stays. No further questions from the prosecutors. Judge Nathan allows that in, allows her to speculate. on why they may have taken her to the movies, which is sort of a weird thing to let in. But next witness, that's it. So that was the direct cross-examination and the redirect examination of Annie Farmer, the final victim in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. And we're almost at the end of all testimony. We're going to see here that we're going to wrap this up nice and quickly. Next witness comes in is Annie Farmer's former boyfriend. This guy's name is David Mulligan. Couldn't find a picture of him. He's apparently a baker. And so we have a picture of this delicious loaf of bread over here representing him. Don't you just want to take a bite out of it? So the line of questioning starts. Prosecutor says, did Annie tell you about how the trip to Thailand was paid for? David Mulligan says, yeah, Epstein paid for it. And what did Annie tell you about being in New York? When you were dating, what'd she tell you? And David says that Annie said that Epstein touched her leg in the theater and she didn't want to say anything because Epstein was helping her sister Maria and her artistic career. Pomerantz, prosecutor, says, did Annie tell you that Maxwell touched her on her chest during the massage? David says, yeah. Did Annie tell you why she didn't speak up? Yeah. She said she was afraid of jeopardizing her sister Maria's opportunities. She was working for Epstein. She was an artist. She had a lot going on for her. Very good. Thanks, David. Bobby Sternheim, Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyer, comes out. Very short direct exam for that witness. Comes back out. We're in cross-exam already. Bobby says, hey, David, you've seen things in the media about this trial, right? Well, I'm not much of a news watcher, to be honest. Cupcakes are more of my thing. Sternheim says, so you know that she made $1.5 million, right? Mulligan says, no, do not know that one. That's interesting. He says, huh? Is the sound that he made. Sternheim says, you guys are friends, right? Yeah. And Annie Farmer, she went to your recent wedding, right? Yeah. Okay. No further questions from you. Thanks, David. And then we get to, I think, we get a little bit of a redirect here. Yeah. So we've got Laura Pomerantz comes back out and says, why do you remember what Annie Farmer told you about New Mexico? Like, why? Mulligan says, these were big moments. We discussed these things while we were being physically affectionate with each other. Pomerantz says, no further questions. Judge Nathan calls the next witness and the last and final witness of the government's case in chief in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. Here it is. We've got Janice Swain. Now, this is not an actual photo of Janice Swain. I was not able to identify her particularly. But this is just a very nice mother and a very nice daughter. Probably something like what Janice and Annie are hopefully doing tonight after a day of grueling testimony. Next witness, Janice Swain comes in. Prosecutor says, hey, Miss Swain, how old are you today? 71. Well, you look fabulous. Prosecutor says, when did you speak with Jeffrey Epstein? And Swain says, well, when he wanted to take Marie on his plane to Florida for a work trip. She was working for him back then. I talked to him back then. And what did he tell you next? Well, he told me about a meeting of students at his ranch in New Mexico. There were college plans or something like that. I asked him who was going to be chaperoning this little affair, and he said that his wife, Ghislaine, would do it. Sounded pretty reasonable to me, so I said, yeah, go on the trip. Go for it. That sounds fun. Who is Ghislaine? Oh, she's a very nice British socialite. These people are billionaires and millionaires. They've got a ton of money. They've got a ranch. They've got private planes. It's probably fine. No big deal. Yeah, Ghislaine's going to be there. So Swain, mom says, and Annie came back, and she had this pair of black boots. She said that Epstein bought them for her. She seemed really tired. Later, I asked what happened in New Mexico. Laura, prosecutor, says, well, what'd she say? Mom says she didn't want to talk about it. Prosecutor says no further questions. Menninger comes out for a short cross-exam, says, you don't know if Maxwell was aware whether Maria would travel to New Mexico, do you? In other words, Maxwell didn't know about any of these trips. And when Annie was in Thailand, you were in Germany, right? Yes, and yes, and yes. No further questions. And the government comes out, the prosecutors rest. The government rests. That's the end of the government's case in chief. And so we're going to break that down here in a quick minute and do some analytical analysis. But before we do, we got to close out the day. When the government rests its case, of course, we're going to get a movement, a judgment, a motion for acquittal. And that's exactly what we've got here. We see this is extremely formulaic. This happens basically at the conclusion of every single government's case. You ask for a motion for a judgment of acquittal. Exactly what's happening here. Ghislaine Maxwell's attorney is doing that. Says, Your Honor, jury leaves now. We now move for an acquittal. Judge Nathan says, like as to all the counts, or 1 or 2 or 4, how many? Everdell says, yeah, all of them, Judge. Counts depend on the testimony of Jane. There is no evidence here that anyone persuaded or induced Jane to come to New York. She came on her own. Therefore, none of these charges stand. Everdell continues. He says there is flying back to Palm Beach. In other words, once Jane lands in New York, she flies back to Palm Beach, but that's her own prerogative. If she wants to travel back to back to Palm Beach, she's free to do that. Nobody's enticing her to go back to Palm Beach. She flew of her own volition to New York. She decided to go back. That's her prerogative, not ours. Accompanying somebody is not encouraging. All Ghislaine did was file some paperwork. So Jane is free to travel all over the place, but we had nothing to do with it. Not coercion, not trafficking, nothing of the sort. Prosecutor comes up, Rohrbach stands up and says, give me a break, Judge. This court should deny that defense motion. Jane was not in New York by accident, all right? She didn't just show up there wandering around trying to find the Statue of Liberty, okay? She was there for a particular purpose. There was no non-sexual reason for her to be there. She was there. We know why she was there. As soon as she sat down in the movie theater, creepy Jeffrey Epstein was rubbing all up and down her leg. All right. Jane said the defendant also talked about sleeping with her. The enticement statute that we've referenced here, Judge, in our indictment is perfectly applicable. And so we're asking that you deny that motion. Thank you. Judge Nathan thinks about it for about 37 seconds and says, yes, motions are denied. Okay, so thanks for making your record. Got it. Yeah, it's obviously going to be denied. I know you had to do it, but it's obvious. Okay, so anything else we need to do before Thursday? Team Maxwell, all the defense attorneys jump in and they say, well, we want our witnesses anonymous too. So the same sort of stuff that we saw, they want anonymity too for all their witnesses. And so that's just great, grand, wonderful. We're going to see what that looks like next week. But that's the conclusion. Now, you'll notice here that they're telling us that we're coming back on Thursday. What? That's right, folks. We don't have any Maxwell trial Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday next week. Who knows why? Somebody must be on vacation or doing Christmas shopping or something. But the judge said no court for the first 3 days next week, and we're going to pick back up with the defense on Thursday. So that means we've got to find some other stuff to talk about. And we will, because there is a plenty. Now, that was the testimony. That is the government's entire case in chief, but we don't stop there. We've got to take a look at the court docket entry because there were some updates that came out this last few days. Let's fly through some of this quickly. I know the show is running long. Some of this I was going to spend a little bit more time on yesterday, but we don't really need to spend a ton of time on it. But I want to show you a few things that are happening. We have a letter. This is a letter by the USA. This is by the prosecutors. They're filing this into Judge Alison Nathan, and they're asking, they're trying to stop this attorney by the name of Robert Glassman from coming in. We'll get there in a minute. We have a minute entry that went in. We don't have any records for this one. There are two things here called a transcript. And so, a transcript, people hear transcript, we're talking about Ghislaine Maxwell, and you say, oh my gosh, a transcript? Boy, that's going to be juicy. It's really not. And then we have juror number 70 that we're going to take a look at, submitting receipts for their transportation costs. So real easy, real quick. Now, I wanted to just share this with you. When I go into my federal PACER account, this is what I see. When I'm looking up sealed documents and sealed orders, sealed records, you can see that when I click this, it says you don't have access to this transcript. This is referencing a proceeding that took place back on November 15th, but this will be processed eventually. So here's what it says. You can go to a terminal and view it. Otherwise, there's going to be a redaction request that's due at the end of December, 12/29, and then there's a redacted deadline set for next year. And then sometime in March, the release of the transcript restriction is set for March of 2022. Do you see that? So we may actually see some documents in March of next year for some of this stuff. Probably not, but maybe. We also see here that juror number 70 he wants to get reimbursed for those parking receipts. It's very expensive to park in New York, as I'm sure you can imagine. And he wants to make sure that he's getting reimbursed. And so Judge Alison Nathan said, all right, juror number 70, I sure hope you brought those receipts, buddy boy. You better get those receipts associated with those costs over to my jury administrator, and then we'll get you reimbursed for those costs. Parking's expensive, like $10 an hour or something like that. It's lunacy. Okay, so this is the big letter, the big motion that the government submitted. This was back on December 6th. And this is all respecting the defense calling their experts, presenting their case. Obviously, that's going to start next week on Thursday. Here's what the government is intending to do. You can see this letter is 8 pages. We're not going to read through it all. It's a lot of law. We're going to fly through it, but I want to show you what's happening here. This is the U.S. government. These are the prosecutors. They're now asking the court to stop the defense from calling Jane's lawyer, this guy, Robert Glassman, as a witness. They're intending to call this guy. Jane hired a lawyer. He went out, made a bunch of statements. They want to ask him about those questions. They're going to try to bring him into court. So the government here is saying, you can't do that. This is all protected by attorney-client privilege. This is that attorney. So this is Robert Hill. There was a filing that he was a part of. And so he made these statements you can see here. Jeffrey Epstein's estate lawyer is accused of belittling the alleged victims. This guy came out, made a bunch of statements. He said, they have done everything that they can to make these cases as difficult as possible for the victims, so the victims feel like they've got no choice. Robert Glassman, an attorney for the alleged victim, said. He helped file a bunch of lawsuits and all this stuff. And so now what the defense is trying to do is call him as a witness, which is just like, nuts. I'd be very mad if I were a lawyer and they tried to do that, to try to sort of get me to testify against my own client. Nuts. But they're trying it. And so what the prosecution is saying here is that attorney-client privilege is, paramount. It protects everything. And they go through, they give us an analysis here. But I want to show you what the defense is doing. They're trying to call this guy. And so let's talk about this just in quick. Let me show you this on the mind map. I think I have him on here. So Jane... Jane, remember, was the first victim. Jane was the person who was in the room. Epstein touched her. She was 14 at the time. She got a $5 million settlement. And she's been sort of, involved in this for a very long time. Comes from a very nice family, a lot of record, a lot going on there. Her lawyer in one of these other lawsuits is this guy, Robert Glassman. And so now what they're trying to do is actually make him almost a witness for the defense. He represented a victim, Jane, and now they're trying to call him so that they can get him to testify. So this letter continues from the prosecution, and you can see the general framework they're trying to lay out. We have a brief discussion on this. First, the defense argues that the advice that Glassman gave was not intended to be kept confidential. They're sort of rebutting that. They say that by him speaking, he didn't waive any privileges over Jane's communication. And third, even if Glassman's statement to the government could waive Jane's privilege, the court should exclude it under evidence under Rule 403. Okay, so sort of this three-prong analysis. That, in other words, allowing this guy to testify would be so harmful to the case that the court should not allow it. Here is what it looks like signed off on by all of the prosecutors. For the foregoing reasons, the court should preclude the testimony of Jane's counsel. And this is just the type of stuff that they're fighting about behind the scenes. We see a lot of this stuff from the transcripts and from Twitter about the stuff that's going on in court. But this is happening to a lower frequency now because we're in trial, but it's still happening behind the scenes. Over the weekend, we're going to see a whole slurry of new motions. I just got pinged that there were new motions that were filed today. And so both sides, they're not done for the weekend. They're going to be going and filing all sorts of stuff. And so we'll have a lot more to catch up on next week. Even though we won't be in trial, there's going to be a lot of filings. I want to take a quick pause and talk about the media and the Ghislaine Maxwell case. Adam Classfield made a very interesting point, saying to those people out there saying that nobody in the media is covering this stuff. Adam Classfield says that's not really true. Says, well, it's been getting wall-to-wall coverage. There's news organizations all over the place. And no one who's actually been here covering the case on the ground can claim otherwise. And then we have Ben Furerherd, who's doing the same thing. Now, somebody else responded on Twitter. We have Kate Brickellett says, well, perhaps there's a perception of a lack of news coverage because more than 90% of the reporters there aren't allowed to have cell phones or laptops, and they can't tweet or talk about this stuff. Classfield says, yeah, I've been basically doing that, but there are other people who are busily reporting away. And so earlier in the week, we got several people who said, yeah, what about this Maxwell trial tracker and some of these, these websites that are out there that just got canceled? And Maxwell trial tracker apparently got canceled, but they are, now back on. But there's a lot of interesting things going on with some of this stuff. We've got this person on Twitter who was talking about this tracker trial, and he went through and was saying that they're kind of spreading a bunch of false information around, that a lot of these tweets are not really accurate. It's got a big following, and that it's still promoting a bunch of misinformation, and talking about the idea that, in fact, a lot of people are talking about this trial. New York Times is talking about it. CNN's got some articles. New York Post is all over it. Reuters is all over it. So I just want to, sort of spread that around. Now, Trial Tracker, this guy, if you want to go read this entire tweet thread, very interesting, saying that he's sort of following, kind of bouncing around different trials and just sort of, retweeting a bunch of stuff that the mainstream media is actually reporting. So, I thought it was an interesting point. There are a lot of people talking about the Maxwell trial. I don't think that there's a big conspiracy here by the media. I think that the media are beneath the conspiracy. They're not a part of it. Like, all of this is way beyond the media. They would love a very salacious Jeffrey Epstein Maxwell story. They'd run all day with it. But they're beyond the purview. They're not in that club. They don't get access to that stuff. So just a thought. Now, speaking of the media, this guy, the guy who burnt down the Fox News Christmas tree, apparently he was exposing himself outside the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, according to some photographer. New York Post reported this. The guy who allegedly arsoned the Christmas tree that we all heard about, guy's name is Craig Tamahana, apparently was captured on camera moments after pulling his pants down to show his privates to members of the media on the first day of the high-profile trial of Epstein's girlfriend. This is according to a Gina Moon, a freelance journalist. So this guy's out there exposing himself, I think the day after he was released for burning the Christmas tree down in New York. So no bond, no cash bail, nothing like that. He's just a free man. He's out there enjoying himself, apparently. So the Ghislaine Maxwell prosecution has rested now. Their case in chief has come to a close. The question is, they do a good job? Let's revisit the calendar for a quick minute, shall we? We remember that the trial started on November 29th. Today, of course, is December 10th. Government has rested its case in a total of 10 calendar trial days. No trials on the weekends. And we know that yesterday, on Thursday the 9th, we have a sick day, so we can get rid of that day. We also know that on the 29th, we had opening arguments, so we can mostly get rid of that day. We also know that some days jurors were late and everything, and we didn't get started until 9:30 or 10. But if you set that aside, that gives us still really a solid 4 days of trial. We've got the 6th, 7th, 8th, the 10th, the 30th, the 1st, the 2nd, and the 3rd. And you might say, well, that's a full 8 days of trial there, Rob. That's a lot of trial there. And so sounds like that might have been enough for one of the most high-profile international trafficking criminal conspiracies that we've ever seen. 8 days? Is that enough to get to the bottom of this little ordeal? Well, I don't know. I'm just a defense lawyer. I'm not a prosecutor. I've never prosecuted an international trafficking conspiracy before. I think it might take longer than 8 days, but what do I know? But I wanted to take a look at some other cases that we have spent a lot of time talking about. First and foremost, Derek Chauvin. Remember how long that trial lasted? We have 8 days in the Ghislaine Maxwell case for the prosecution to present their case. How many days did it take Derek Chauvin, the prosecution team there, to present their case? Remember, in Ghislaine Maxwell, we've got 4 victims. Derek Chauvin, George Floyd, we had 1. Derek Chauvin, we had 1 date, time, and location. Ghislaine Maxwell, we've got dozens. Multiple states, multiple jurisdictions, federal court versus state court. Jeffrey Epstein, billions of dollars, multiple women, multiple witnesses, multiple different law enforcement agencies, several different law enforcement agencies in the Epstein case, local law enforcement, the feds out in Palm Beach, Florida, out in New Mexico, out in New York. Complicated stuff. 8 days is all it took. The prosecutors in Derek Chauvin's case, they took 11. That case began on March 29th. They rested on April 13th after just 11 days of testimony. They called 38 witnesses. One victim. Yeah, there was a lot of medical issues there, no doubt. Medical issues are complicated. So are victims. Okay, George Floyd didn't testify. The victims did here. 11 days for Derek Chauvin for the government to make their case. Here, 8. And so you say, Rob, that's not a case involving victims or anything like that. Give me a better comparison. Okay, here is Bill Cosby's case. Remember Bill Cosby? He was tried twice, ultimately convicted and imprisoned, and then released on appeal. Probably the same thing that's going to happen with Maxwell. But in this case, Bill Cosby only had one victim. Only one. Her name was Kelly Johnson, and their trial started on June 5th. One victim, Kelly Johnson, for the first time took the stand, spoke. She testified on June 5th, on June 6th. Defense attorneys, June 7th, cross-examined her. We have prosecution then closes their case on June 9th. You see this here? From June 5th to June 9th, one victim, the prosecution took 4 days. June 12th, the defense calls one witness and rests its case. Okay, so let's say that you can get through one witness in 4 days. Let's just say we use the Cosby standard. The government case, June 5th to June 9th, 4 days to present one victim in a Cosby case. Here we had 4 victims. So 4 times 4 is 16. We didn't take 16 days. We took 8. And this is a little bit more complicated than one Bill Cosby case. So it's leaving some people raising their eyebrows like me. What's going on here? Why did they just cut it so short? They told us that this was going to go well into January, predicting maybe 6 weeks of testimony. Typically, the government takes the lion's share of that. Maybe you break it up into 4 weeks of government presenting their materials and then 2 weeks of a defense rebuttal. But we didn't get that at all. We didn't even get a full 2 weeks. We got 8 days in one of the most high-profile cases of all time. A lot of people thinking that the prosecutors have fumbled the ball on this. Let's see if you have anything to say about that. I forgot about our new polls form. Let's see what the poll says here. Oh, yeah. Hey, we got some no's now. All right, so we've got 75%, say prosecutors have fumbled the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. That form is over there on the YouTube link. We have 15% say they don't know. 11% say no. Prosecution seems like it's pretty good. But most people here are saying that it sounds like they kind of botched this thing. Yeah. I think you're basically right on that. Gabriel Sherman agrees with that. Gabriel Sherman's over at Vanity Fair, written a bunch of stuff all over the place, and he's wrote a headline that says the prosecution here is fumbling its case. This was yesterday. They planned to rest their case this week. They, of course, did. But he talks about a couple things that might be problematic. On Tuesday, prosecutors stunned reporters by announcing that the government intends to rest its case before Friday, weeks earlier than anticipated. All raises the painful question, will Maxwell go free? He says he was dismayed. Prosecutor Laura Pomerantz's opening statements was 35 minutes long, 10 minutes less than the government statement in the Elizabeth Holmes trial. Also underwhelmed that prosecutors didn't call a victim first. They called off Larry Vysotsky, the pilot, who basically was like an Epstein victim. Says he never saw any acts with the underage women on any of his planes. That was kind of weird. Testimony from Maxwell's alleged victims have been harrowing. On Tuesday, third accuser testified that Epstein abused her more than 100 times when she was 14. Carolyn recalled a lot of the testimony. She was heartbroken, saying that my soul is broken. But prosecutors didn't ask her about any of Epstein's friends. Her testimony was only undermined by the seeming lack of preparation by the prosecution. Under cross-examination, one of Maxwell's lawyers, Paliuka, exposed many inconsistencies in her prior comments. Paliuka noted Carolyn didn't mention Maxwell's name once during her first interview with the FBI in 2007. Didn't even mention her name. Neither did Carolyn include Maxwell's name in subsequent lawsuits filed against Sarah Kellen. Paliuka said, "Your two lawsuits involving Epstein and Kellen, they say nothing about Maxwell, right?" Carolyn said, "Yeah, correct." Paliuka said, "Your deposition testimony in 2009, it also says nothing about Maxwell, right? Other than the two words that Miss Comey read, right?" Carolyn says, "Yes." So you filed lawsuits in 07, nothing. You file another one in 09, nothing. Why is that? Of course, the absence of Maxwell's name doesn't mean it's true, but prosecutors should have been more prepared for that, he says. There was a similar dynamic last week with Jane. Laura Menninger pressed Jane to comment on why her testimony differed from her prior interviews with the FBI. Why the differences? She seemed rattled by the questions, at one point alleging that the FBI incorrectly transcribed her comments. Oh, it's just a typo. Remember that? It's just a typo, repeatedly. On Tuesday, the government suffered another embarrassing setback when Maxwell's defense revealed that Jane called her brother, who was a government witness, and complained about the cross-examination, saying that Menninger was a front, like the door. Weakest plank came, though, has been the lack of testimony from Epstein's innermost circle. Prosecutors haven't called Epstein's highest profile accuser, Guffrey, to the stand, even though her name has been mentioned by multiple witnesses. Epstein's 2007 non-prosecution agreement listed 4 of the alleged co-conspirators. We talked about them earlier on the show: Sarah Kellen, Adriana Ross, Leslie Groff, and Nadiana Marcinkova. Maxwell's name's not on there. All of those women could testify about the role. Why didn't they gain their cooperation? And if they didn't cooperate, why didn't the government charge them too? Good question, Vanity Fair, Gabriel Sherman. They're listed in the non-prosecution agreement. You can see it right here. We go over to the Ghislaine Maxwell mind map and we zoom in on Jeffrey Epstein. These 4 women were all named in this non-prosecution agreement. You can see them right here. It says specifically, the United States agrees that it will not institute any criminal charges against any of these people: Adriana, Leslie, Nadia, Sarah Kellen, including but not limited to. The way that I read that includes Ghislaine Maxwell. And the prosecutor, the government, whoever drafted this thing and authorized it and signed it and gave all these people a free pass. Whew, man. Okay, so this goes on. It's possible the government may call 1 or more before arresting, but nope, they didn't. Nothing meaningful came out. The final question that we have comes courtesy of our boy, Mark Richards, the man who helped Kyle Rittenhouse become acquitted. He gets asked the question about testifying. Is Ghislaine Maxwell going to take the stand? Is she going to get up there? Judge Alison Nathan is going to ask Miss Maxwell if she wants to take the stand and tell her side of the story. Typically, we advise against that. Mark Richards, veteran lawyer who put Kyle Rittenhouse on the stand, says, yeah, I think she would do more harm than good. He said that if Maxwell decides to testify, prosecutors could confront her with the evidence of her ties to Mr. Epstein, who died in jail, allegedly. Richards said, she's trying to separate herself from Epstein. At least now you can blame it on a dead guy, which is a very astute point. And other people are saying, they're going through this analysis. We have Stephen Gillers, professor of legal ethics at NYU, says defendants rarely overrule their lawyers. Sometimes they have an exaggerated sense of their ability to handle aggressive government questioning. So, yeah, very unlikely that she takes a stand. They're talking about it's likely it's going to come down to the government's assessment of the defense's assessment of the government's case, and so on and so forth. All right, and my friends, that was it then. That's the update on Ghislaine Maxwell trial, days 9 and 10. The government has rested its case in chief. We've got the defense that's going to be preparing over the weekend and into the week next week, because no trial on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, unfortunately. But they're going to pick back up on Thursday, and we'll be there to cover it. And I want to hear from you and see what you have to say about this over from our friends at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And let's see who is here and what everybody has to say about it. We got our poll here. Did prosecutors fumble the Ghislaine Maxwell trial? We've got 83 responses that say yes. 73% say yes, 10% say no, 15% say don't know. Okay, so let's do this. Let's do a quick question change on this. And we're gonna change this briefly, this question. I think I can do this in real time. And we're going to say verdict on Ghislaine Maxwell trial. Let's see if we can do this in real time. We'll say all guilty. We'll say all not guilty. And we'll say split verdict. And we'll also say mistrial. All right. And so verdict now. Okay, and so we're going to jump into the questions, and so those responses will now change. And so if you've already responded, you're free to respond again. We're going to take a look at what this looks like. Now, I think I might have to reset this. Hang on a second. I think I have to reset this. Delete all responses. Yes. Okay. So now you can do it again. So now you can vote, and then we'll take a look at it again. So we've got one not guilty, all not guilty. We've got one all not guilty. Oh, it's coming in already. Yeah, you can see it's coming in real time. We've got 8 responses on this puppy. So here it is. Let's take a look. We've got split verdicts. 23 responses coming in. All right, we've got split verdict is still in the lead, 43% of it with the split verdict. Mistrial says 10%. Yeah, somebody's asking about a hung jury. That would be basically a mistrial. So that would be like if they can't reach a verdict. Yeah. All right, so we're seeing some numbers change it around here a little bit. We'll check back in. So it's actually, yeah, it's split verdict. So might get a few of them. How many responses do we got? About 76 responses coming in. All right, so good. Keep on voting away. We'll check back in and see what we're at sort of halftime now. The government has stopped presenting their case, and so we'll have to check back in on it. Okay, let's see what else we've got here. So my first note is to former LEO that sent me a message about Kim Potter. I'll read that, and we can talk about that later. C. Rose is here. Says, Rob, do you think it's a good idea to have Ghislaine testify? My humble opinion, Ghislaine testifying just opens the door to all kinds of problems. The jurors may not like her voice, the way she says certain words. She may even get impeached on cross if the prosecution even tries. Thoughts? Yeah, thoughts are I would not put her on the stand at all. I think that there's no benefit to doing that. I don't think that she's got a good case. It's sort of, if you have a bad case, you don't want to put somebody up there to talk about it. If you did it, it's hard to put you on the stand to talk about it. See what happened to Jussie Smollett, the juiciest of the juicies? He did it. And he got up there and he tried to fib about it. Didn't work out for him. Only hurts. So I think that's a big no. Good to see you, C. Rose. We've got Sergeant Bob says, perhaps the prosecution did not want to start the beautiful, rich political people. Could there be a lot of behind-the-scenes influence? Yeah, I think that there absolutely could be. Perhaps the prosecution did not want to start involving the beautiful, rich political people. Yeah. Well, it's Comey's daughter, right? That's the first thing that a lot of people think. Not implying anything, nefarious going on there, but it's easy to jump into that conspiracy mode because of that. Vientika says, yep, totally following the science in that courtroom. Sorry, but I just need to get on a little rant again. When people would say that you should listen to doctors about masks, I'd reply that I'll sure do what I can when I plan on eating one. The letters MD do not stand for materials and dynamics. It's not a doctor's field on how particulates travel through the air and how they interact with different materials. This lies within the scope of people like myself who are expertise in physics and engineering. That's from Vienticus Prime. Are you trying to trigger a mass debate right now? Nikki Dragon says, why did the state not push the human trafficking aspect more? Are they trying to protect the clients? Yeah, I mean, there's you know how much evidence is in this trial? There's an entire black book of people, of names. There's flight logs of names. There's a non-prosecution agreement with names. There are lawsuits. There are hundreds of women who are claiming to be victims of this entire ordeal that has been going on for like 3 decades, involving the most powerful people in the world. We got 8 days of prosecution. They would prosecute, folks. If your son or daughter got charged with a crime, they'd have no problem spending 3 weeks prosecuting your son. I've seen it happen. No problem. 3 weeks, 4 weeks, no, whatever it takes. No problem at all. What do you have? He had a couple of illegal drugs on his person. Oh my gosh. Well, we're going to have to make sure that we devote all of our resources for this one. Here we have some of the most horrendous evil allegations that have ever been revealed, ever, and publicly, that our elected leaders are sort of maybe a part of, and we get 8 days of prosecution. Okay, so it's a sad state of affairs when you realize that this is what our justice system looks like. Outnumbered Mom says, while I would have liked to see more victim testimony to bolster the case, I do think it's favorable to shorten the case and not lock up the jury for 6 to 8 weeks. We have to remember they can see the jury, we can't. According to Joe, people are saying the jury looks annoyed and disgusted with the defense table. Well, it's probably true. I mean, that's mostly how most jurors feel, so it wouldn't surprise me a minute. Soul Viking says, it's so amazing how fast the trial has progressed, and the deflection onto Sarah Kellen and others is not surprising. In the end, it won't be enough to acquit GM. The mind map is pretty amazing. Thank you, Rob. Well, thank you, Soul Viking. I'm glad you're enjoying it. I'm having a lot of fun with it. Let's see. We've got 187 responses now on the verdict. 180. Let's see what we've got. We've got 4. Yeah, so we've got all not guilty. Whoa, man, that's a big claim. That's a lot. All not guilty. Whew. And we got 30% saying it's a split verdict. 7.2 say it's a mistrial. 21.5% say all guilty. Yeah, it's changing in real time. All right, so we'll check back on that before we wrap up for the day. We've got a couple other questions. Let's check over what's going on YouTube. We had some super chats come in. VIP says, unnamed co-conspirator Trump. How so? Is he on the mind map as an unnamed co-conspirator? Well, so in this section, it's a good question. So in this section, I just sort of have people that were sort of in the purview. Now, Bill Clinton, Prince Andrew, and Kevin Spacey, I think that they were all in the flight log. So this could really be built out a lot differently. I haven't spent a lot of time on this section. I'm open to suggestions on this, right? Because you've got Bill Gates, you've got Lex Wessner, you've got all of the Hollywood people, you've got everybody's on this list. So I just kind of threw everybody on that list, but I'm open for suggestions on how to divvy that out a little bit more. But anyways, come check it out. If you're a supporter at watchingthewatchers.locals.com, you have access to the full mind map. Mark Owens is here with a 2121, says, thank you for all that you do. Well, thank you, Mark Owens. I appreciate that. Thanks for being here. Hope you're enjoying it. I'm having fun. Kevin W. says, the judge is going to the White House for a promotion. The judge is going up. I think it's, what circuit are they in? The Second Circuit? I think it's the Second Circuit over there. I can never remember my circuits. Let's see what it is. Yeah, it's New York. Second Circuit, yeah. So it's the Second Circuit Court, Southern District of New York. And so she'll be going from the district level, I think, up into that Second Circuit. She's got a nomination to be an appeals court judge. So if Ghislaine Maxwell is convicted here and she is sentenced to prison and she appeals it, which she certainly will, and I think she's got actually a very good basis for that appeal, then this judge, if she is actually appointed to the Second Circuit, she might have to recuse herself so that she does not participate in the hearing of the appeal. Let's see. We've got Jessica Mai says, have you followed the Dozinger case? Oh my gosh. Remind me of that one. Chevron. Yeah, that guy. Yes, he just, didn't he just get out of jail? I think he's now back on home detention. He's there for like 180 something days. Good news. Yeah. I heard about that case. Another unbelievable one. Yeah, there's corruption all over the place. Everywhere you turn, I know it's a sad thing to realize. This is it. This is the culmination of everything. 4 prosecutors, millions of dollars, FBI all over the place, investigating Palm Beach and the mansions and New Mexico and everywhere. 8 days. We're done. We had a sick day. We're done. We started at 9:30 every day also, but it's all we got. Now, they might win, right? It might be a total, she might be convicted on all counts, and maybe it's a big victory, but certainly feels like it's a little bit wanting, doesn't it? All right, we've got some other questions. Monster One says, the more I hear of this Maxwell trial, the more I don't like it. Everything is about Epstein, nothing about Maxwell other than being there. If she is guilty, then so is Juan and everyone else who worked there. It's a good point, isn't it, Monster One? It's a pretty good point. Yeah, and they're trying to make it about her. Monster One also says, are you watching any of the Kim Potter trial? Prosecution pulled a binger today. When Mr. Wright was shot, did you see a gun in his hand? Did he have a grenade in his glove box? Did he have a rocket launcher in the back seat? It's becoming clear they have no case. They are spending the whole time talking about everything but the actual shooting. Wow, that's interesting. I have not been watching any of the Kim Potter trial. Honestly, I have not. I've been focusing all on Ghislaine Maxwell, and I know a lot of other attorneys are covering that one closely. Vientica says, so all the other witnesses are good to mention at least one other person other than Maxwell. Where's the ones that mention something other than Epstein? Yeah. So in other words, if you Venn diagram this thing, everybody's in the Epstein circle, everybody, but nobody's only in the Maxwell circle, right? Everybody's in, even Maxwell, the stuff that Maxwell is sort of being alleged to have done here. It's all sort of connected to Epstein to some degree because they lost Epstein. Geomancy Games is here. Hey, Geomancy, hope you're feeling better, brother, and doing well. Glad to see you here. Says, I said this on Twitter, but with enough money and influence, you can buy pure evil. The sicker I get with my cancer, the more I see and believe that evil truly exists in our world. Please continue to shine that big, beautiful spotlight on the corruption in our time. Also, subscribe on YouTube. Geomancy Games, as you heard from his comment, he is struggling and fighting cancer and doing a great job. He's over on our locals community, and we're sending you our love, Geo. Thinking a lot about you. He's also on YouTube. If you are on YouTube, go over there. Subscribe. Geomancy Games. Subscribe on YouTube. Hope you're well, Geo. We've got Peely Wally says, Rob, off topic, wanted to check in to say much love to you in the community. I'm going through some bad personal times, and just now because of a loss in the family. Sorry to hear that, Peely Wally. Our thoughts and prayers are with you, my friend. You know, there's a lot of that going on right now. You know, not to plug it, but ericshouse.org is a good organization for people that have lost somebody. Maybe it's applicable to you, but there's a lot of grief and support groups out there, so I'd encourage you to reach out if you're looking for help. I will be back in a week or two with my usual inputs from Scotland. Have a great weekend, all, and take care. All right, so some extra love and prayers for Peely Wally out there. If you have any to spare, send some his way. We'll be thinking of you, Peely, and we'll see you when you're back. Jeremy says, Rob, can you briefly remind us of the charges brought and the laws the prosecution are trying under Ghislaine? Federal age of consent is 18 under anti-trafficking law. I don't see how the age of consent in New Mexico matters in this case. Act of exchanging money makes it trafficking. The girls wouldn't have put themselves through this if they knew up front what was going on. Yeah, but so the problem with that, with all of that, it's like, yes, they could have charged her with a whole slew of additional crimes. That is true, but they didn't. They charged her with the crimes that are in the indictment. And if the facts don't match the crimes that are listed in the indictment, you don't just get to say, well, what we really meant was trafficking. No, it's not how this works. We have, these are the charges. This came down from the indictment. Jeremy, if you want to see the actual indictment, you can click here. There's a link to this on courtlistener.com, and you can read through it. You can actually see what the factual background is and what they're claiming happened. Now, in the indictment, you'll see these different things called counts. So her efforts to conceal her conduct. Let's see here. Count 2. Okay. Enticement of a minor. So here they're talking about enticement of a minor. If this is the crime that has been charged, These are the facts of the crime that has been charged. If they can't prove this, they don't get to just change it. Oh, what we meant is actually trafficking of an adult to engage in intercourse. That's not what that charge is. It's enticement of a minor. Well, guess what? Kate wasn't a minor, apparently. She's not a victim of anything that was charged in this indictment. Apparently was the instruction. I don't know. That's why it's so important that they charge it correctly. You can win cases because they just mischarge something and they don't realize it. So, and prosecutors know that. Okay, a couple other questions before we wrap up for the day. We've got Monster One says, the defense made the judge mad. That's why she overruled them on that last question. It very well could be. It very well could be. Also says, you've never seen Primal Fear? You need a great legal movie. It's about a guy, Edward Norton, love Edward Norton, who kills someone. His lawyer, Richard Gere, tries to get him off on insanity. Won't tell you how it ends, but it has one of the best twists ever. Sounds pretty good. DG McBride says, from the testimony, it sounds as if Miss Farmer's sister, at a minimum, was an unindicted co-conspirator. Any educated speculation on why she wasn't indicted or called to testify? No, I don't, DG. I don't know why 100 people haven't been called to testify in this trial. It's a good question. I don't know. It's anybody's guess why she wasn't called or why any of those other co-conspirators weren't called or anybody else that's on the mind map from the Epstein wing. And we haven't even played with that. The mind map is really only about the Maxwell trial. None of the Epstein 2000, any of that stuff. I mean, it's all sort of stuff that I've been gathering incidentally through the investigatory process, but haven't sought out to do that. I don't know why they're not being called to testify. Maybe we should ask Maureen Comey. Vientikis says, I wonder what will be the end result of that list that the judge kicked back because of the too many redactions. We're just going to see, like a broken fax machine, just big pages of blackness. Monster One also says, can we do Kim Potter next week until Thursday? Probably could. Yeah, I mean, I'll take a look at it. I'm open. Sergeant Bob says, I want to see Slick Willie Clinton brought into this. Ignore the potential play on the words, pun, regarding the Willie. Sergeant Bob. Sergeant, I see what you did there. C. Rose says, 8 days for a prosecution's case in chief involving federal criminal charges of this magnitude of Ghislaine's. I'm very happy to see the prosecutors are seeking justice as their job so requires. Yeah, they're doing hard work out there, C. Rose. They're getting out there fighting for justice, putting these traffickers behind bars. But they're tired. And, so 2 weeks, it's like, oh, finally. Now we can finally rest and let them go. So we'll be done here in 3 weeks of testimony. Nuts. Sergeant Bob says, maybe the prosecutors, maybe they're considering the, quote, lowest common denominator of the jurors. Cut it short so as not to confuse. Part of the other real reason why they're cutting it short is because I think the judge precluded them from going down certain lines of testimony because of that age of consent issue. Speech Unleashed says, sounds like the prosecution has a better case against Epstein than it does against Maxwell. Not that I agree with Maxwell's actions or behavior, but it seems as if Epstein is the predominant offender and Maxwell was only involved here on occasions. We'll have to see if the jurors agree with you. We have Hugh, last name Janus, says yesterday the Atlantic put out an article claiming that trafficking was a fake epidemic during the unfolding of the trial. Whoa. Is this because Lauren Powell Jobs, Steve Jobs' widow, owns the Atlantic? Lauren is best friends with Maxwell, which is true. I saw that on Twitter. I think I bookmarked that. Let's take a quick look at this. Twitter now has very nice folders if you, here this one is. If you buy Twitter Blue, which I have. Lauren Powell Jobs, Steve Jobs' widow, and Ghislaine Maxwell having fun. They posted this article, apparently. Caitlin Tiffany, the great child trafficking epidemic, and there's Ghislaine Maxwell in a bathing suit. So that's fun. We've got that article that's now out there. Wild times. Sergeant Bob says, juries are a crapshoot. No opinion on the verdict. You know that. All right, let's check in. Well, we'll check in at the end of the show. SDNY is corrupt, says, can't trust this trial. It's not live stream. Southern District of New York is just trying to Epstein Ghislaine Maxwell. We have DG McBride says, Rob, would be interesting to ask a poll question and ask whether the prosecution has thrown this case on purpose. That's another good one. That's a good one. Maybe we'll do that. Should we do that now? Let's do that now. Since we're on it, we'll just go ahead and do it. But before we do, let's take a look at the poll. All right, we got 357 responses now. And so we're going to change this up and reset it real quick. But we'll take a final little screenshot of this, just a quick mark. So we're noticing that as the government has rested its case, this is what we have. 67, 2/3 are saying not guilty across the board. Pretty amazing. 2/3. So we'll memorialize that. We'll come back and we'll check. We'll see how that holds up. And we'll do a quick reset on the question here. Let me do this. And so the question, I think, was, has the prosecution thrown this case on purpose? Let's try that one. Okay. That is coming up. Has the prosecution thrown the case intentionally? We'll say yes, and we'll say no, and we'll say not sure, just for those who want to answer but are just not sure. All right, so we've got that changed. We're going to do a quick reset on this, delete all responses, and boom, we're good to go. All right, so has the prosecution thrown the case intentionally? We've got responses coming in. I think that we know what the answer on this one is going to be. So it's an interesting question, but I'm pretty sure this is going to be a one-sided answer, but we'll see. Okay, we've got Vientica says, Assange's extradition to the U.S. was granted today. I saw that. We can talk a lot of Assange maybe next week also. We've got Outnumbered Mom says, only way she'd take the stand is over the strong objections of her counsel. She'd be a huge liability to their case. She's so smug, it could possibly make people think that she think is a good idea. So yeah, so Outnumbered Mom is saying that, you know, she might be so arrogant and so egomaniacal that she thinks that she can get up there and convince everybody to come to her way of thinking. I agree with you. Ghislaine Maxwell is stupid is here. Says, Ghislaine is stupid. She should have fled the country with no extradition treaty. Some place that has bad diplomatic relations with the U.S. after Epstein was killed. Has all the money from the estate. Could have lived her life comfortably. Now she'd get Epstein because of her stupidity. Yeah, well, who knows if she tried and wasn't able to do it. Julian Assange is being moved to the U.S. It's been approved, assuming that Ghislaine is convicted. Now we've got Maxwell and Assange getting Epsteined. Grouchy old cat lady says, can they retry her again with more different victims? Yeah, they could. I mean, if it was a different date of offense and if it was a different ordeal, yeah, they could do it. Cora says, impressed with all the work you've done for this trial. Thank you. Also, consider this my RSVP for tomorrow, which is amazing. You timed that perfectly because we've got only one more question left. Doug Ducey says, Rob, I need you to wear a mask more often. Well, I'm not going to do it, Doug, and there's nothing you can do about that, buddy boy. So we had our question from Cora. Cora says that we've got a very nice meetup tomorrow taking place, and I hope that you will join us. It's Saturday, December 11th from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. That's going to be 5 p.m. Mountain, 6 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. on the Pacific Coast, but 7 p.m. on the East Coast. 7 to 8 p.m. We always go a little bit longer. But join us. I'm going to post a registration link tonight at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Join us. It's going to be the ugly sweater edition, and it's going to be a lot of fun. In fact, I've got mine right here. This is it. I'm wearing it. I'm not going to open it up and show you what it is. I actually don't think it's that ugly at all. I think it's pretty damn beautiful. But I'm going to wear it. And we're going to talk about it tomorrow. So it's on Zoom. Cameras on if you want. Cameras off if you want. Real name, fake name, doesn't matter. Say something. Don't say something. Raise your hand or don't. It's going to be about 90 minutes probably because I've got another thing that I have to do after that. But it's super casual. A lot of fun if you're not doing anything else on a Saturday night. Come by and say hello. I want to welcome some new people who joined our community. We've got Randy J98. We've got Westworld. Equestrian Girl is in the house. Richie DC, Red Jersey, Nikki Dragon, Things and Stuff. Donna 107, The Vez. We've got Jimmy W. Big T Other Bites, Kimmy Cat 03, Kevin AZ, Antar 24, Queen of Tennessee. We've got Rebby Lee, Music Box Lady, Big Ree, Phantasmagloria, Black Cat Meow, Nick McLeod, Dr. Brenton T. Blakemore, Patriot Minutes here. J. Markey, Cantney 79, Brodyson, Squirrel, Ono 50, P. Palin, Tester 16T, Llama Brad, Kenny HCFC, Star 55, Aldo the Apache, Carrie C, Gino Scrajab, and Rugger Bugger. And that, my friends, before we get out of here, we got to check on that poll, don't we? But that is it for me for the day. Let's take a look at these numbers. Yeah, it's about what we suspected. Did the prosecution throw the case? Did they throw it intentionally? 90% say, yeah, they did. Oh, well, that's just a shame. Isn't that just a shame? 90.4% out of 167 responses. We've just got a small slithering 5% say, no, they didn't, Rob. And another 4% say, we're not too sure about it. But thank you for participating in our poll. That's kind of fun. It's kind of fun and interesting. A new little thing to add into the show. All right, my friends, that is it for me for the day. I will be back here on Monday. We're going to cover it all again. Not sure exactly what we're going to be talking about since Ghislaine Maxwell is not going to be in trial, but we'll figure it out, and hopefully you are there to join us. One final reminder to check out our community at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. We've got our monthly meetup taking place tomorrow. I would love to see you there. Mind maps are all available at watchingthewatchers.locals.com as well. Ghislaine Maxwell, I'm working on. Alec Baldwin. We've got Chad Reed shooting I'm working on. The Crumbly mind map is already up and over there, though, along with Ghislaine Maxwell. So if you want that, there's a lot of stuff cooking. Come check it out. Everybody, thank you so much for being here. Had a lot of fun with all of you this week. Be well, unplug from politics, get off the internet, spend some time with friends and family. Get some exercise and some fresh air. I'm going to try to do all of those things. We'll see how successful I am. But I hope to see you back here tomorrow. Everybody, have a tremendous weekend. Sleep very well. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.